Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Commerce Lab by Ecomcy. My name is Vincenzo Toscano, founder and CEO of Ecomcy. Today, we have another special guest. Her name is Elizabeth Greene, and she's the co-founder of ZONGURU, which is an Amazon ads management agency. Today's topic is going to be around what are the best practices and tips around everything that has to do with Amazon PPC optimization. Now, without any further delay, Elizabeth, let me introduce you. How are you doing today?
Good. I'm doing good. How are you? Happy to be here.
Good, good. I mean, it's a pleasure to have you. I have seen all your posts in LinkedIn. I know you share a lot of content, blogs, other podcasts. So, for sure, when I was seeing all the strategies and tips you were sharing out there, I thought to myself, yeah, you need to definitely come into my podcast. You have so much knowledge and experience in the space. So, it's a pleasure to have you for sure.
Well, thanks. I'm flattered.
No problem. Great. So before we get started with today's topic, I usually like to give a few minutes to my guests to introduce yourself in more depth, just about maybe where you're from, where you're based, what you do, and how you got started into the Amazon space, and then we can for sure jump into today's questions. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try and give the nutshell version of it.
Sure.
So we're going a little over 3 years now as an agency. Um, as far as getting into it, I kind of feel like I fell into it.
Yeah.
For the longest time, me and my husband were working to do something because working online gives just a lot of freedom. So his background, his family is very, very entrepreneurial, but they
That's
work more
great.
in construction, which is definitely a situational based, and you have to show up every day
Yeah,
different locations versus being able to stay in one central location, which is one
for
of the
sure.
benefits of being able to work from home. So all of our team is remote. I like it that way because we got into it for the freedom of it, and so I prefer just to continue that. Um,
Great.
and yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, thank you for sharing. I think for sure most of the people that jump into e-commerce, what we fall in love with is the freedom to do whatever we want with our time and
Mhm.
location. I think that's the biggest gift besides the money for sure. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think having that freedom, even myself, that's the main reason why I also left my job and started the agency. So we definitely have a lot in common on that. Thank you for sharing. Great. So I think let's start with today's topic, which of course is something that people request a lot, which I'm pretty sure you receive also a lot in your DMs and your comments, and people just asking for help and crying about PPC, how expensive it is, how to optimize it. So I think it's gonna be great to start with today's first question, which is usually if you can start touching around what are usually some of the basics you take in consideration whenever you are starting to optimize an account that hasn't been optimized before. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I think all optimization starts with goals. That's a
Mhm.
huge one, and I think that's a very overlooked topic because everyone just wants to dive into it. But the problem with
Yeah.
optimization is optimization, while it seems like it's a black box, and you're like, when you hear that word, it tells you absolutely nothing. It's really difficult, and I get when someone says, "Oh my gosh, my ACoS is really high," and they're like,
Yeah.
"Optimize your campaigns."
Yeah.
Yes, but
Sure.
that's not helpful. But what I think is really helpful is to take a step back from that and recognize that optimization is simply trying to move the needle toward a specific goal. Be that lowering a cost, be that lowering a cost typically means a little bit more profitability, or you might be in more of what I would consider like a launch or ranking phase, where in that particular case, if you get too restrictive with the ads, it actually is detrimental to your end goal.
Hmm.
So I think it's really, really important to take a step back, keep that in mind. The things that we look at when we're trying to decipher what the actual goals are. Us as an agency, it's a little bit easier because our clients tell us, but we definitely have to help them kind of come to that conclusion. Some brands come to us with a very definite conclusion, and so we
Hmm.
just build for that. Some
Hmm.
brands come to us because they're unsure and they need our expertise to help them sort of decipher it. But the things that I take into account is one, how much budget do you have? that's a really, like, what does your capital
Yeah,
look like
number
if you're
one.
coming into it with very low capital,
Yeah,
and you need to be more profit conscious? How we're going to build out those accounts and how we're going to optimize is going to be much more strategic and much more, I would say, heavy-handed in a way
yes,
than an account that's coming to us like we have a large budget and we're in a ranking
yeah,
phase. Those are two separate, like, completely different accounts,
for
completely
sure.
different optimizations. The basics are the same. We're still, adjusting bids and moving things toward a goal,
Mhm.
but the actual, like, nuts and bolts and how we would treat things, I would say is going to be vastly, vastly different. Um,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's a big one. I think the budget is definitely what defines your strategy, because if you have just $500 per month, it's completely different strategy if you have 10K per
mhm.
month. I mean, you can explore like sponsor brands, sponsor display advertising that's usually more expensive. So yeah, for sure we have seen that as well. I think what people also sometimes wonder is that, I mean, most of the people that usually see this content is people that, of course, might not have that huge budget, and they
Mhm.
might need to look for that advice around how they can optimize on their own using software tools or even manually. So I think what I want to start touching on is the manual side of things. Is usually the metrics you would
Mhm.
advise to a person that has a low budget, like maybe 500 to 1,000 per month. What are usually the metrics they should be focusing on in terms of looking at the reports, looking at the dashboard, having an understanding and see, okay, this is what I need to fix. These are the keywords I need to scale, and these are the keywords I might need to remove.
Yeah. It's a good thing. So the other thing that definitely comes into play, in addition to just how much budget you have, is what are your profit margins. If you're dealing with like low profit margins, like say below 30%, then
Yeah,
again, you're just gonna have less wiggle room
yeah,
than someone. I'm hearing some people now that they've been able to source products that are in like the 45% profit margin. Like
yeah,
those two products are gonna have completely different,
for sure.
again, just what you're able to do with them. So if we have a limited budget, our like agency places a very high value, and I think any agency or any brand owner who's really in the data and really knows a lot about PPC, we always want to focus on where does the product fit in the market first. Because the thing that is very different about Amazon advertising versus a lot of other platforms out there, Google search is relatively similar, is we can't actually control the search volume, and we're not going out and prospecting for traffic. What we're doing is we're harnessing traffic, putting the eyeballs on the product, and then your product should speak to the audience. And so what you need to do is you need to find the right audience for your product.
Yeah,
And so how you do that is just by picking the right keywords. And so we like to say we'd like to get highly relevant keywords. Highly
that's right.
relevant keywords can be found. They adequately describe your product. And there's some keywords where you're not 100% sure. You're like, I think this is my product. I don't. Go
Yeah,
type it in on Amazon, see what shows up on the page. Does your product fit on the page?
yeah,
Because rankings on Amazon, for a lot of it, are determined by the sales volume. So if
yes.
something has a high amount of sales volume, those are the products that are being most purchased through that particular search. So if you fit on the page, you can have a good idea that your product is going to speak to those shoppers if it's somewhat related.
Yeah, for sure. I think now that you mentioned that around ranking, I think a lot of people don't understand that sometimes in some scenarios it's worth it to have a high ACO, sorry, as long as the tacos, which is the bottom line, is slow, because you need to understand for sure that as you start generating sales on those keywords, your organic ranking is going to improve, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
which actually makes me jump to my next question, which is how you optimize the campaigns by also taking consideration your organic position, because I know some people might say, okay, if I'm already on page one organically, I'm not going to advertise, or I'm going to turn off my PPC. So how would you advise people to optimize their campaigns by also having a look at the organic positioning on those keywords?
Yeah. So I'm actually working on a presentation now that's all about
Yeah,
deciphering numbers.
that's
And
great.
there is, so everyone knows about ACOS, or if you're in Amazon advertising, you should know about ACOS.
For sure.
TACOS is also becoming more and more in vogue to talk about, because everyone's recognizing that this is a number that relates to your entire account versus just
Specific
looking at
campaign.
your ads in
Yeah.
isolation. Correct. There's a third number, which a lot of savvy advertisers talk about, but I don't think it's become as mainstream, which is the ratio of your ad orders to your organic orders. So basically how much of your entire orders are driven through the ad platform. And so that's actually going to be a really important number when you're going after rankings and you're trying to look at, should I pull back on my ads at all if I'm ranked? So you want to be tracking your ACoS, of course. I would calculate tacos. I would say that's more important in this scenario, but I would also calculate the percentage of ad orders. And all you got to do is you got to go and take your ad sales, divide that by your total orders across the same date range. That's, calculate that as a percentage. You're going to get a percentage and you say, okay, if I am ranked really well and like 70% of my orders are coming from my ads versus my organic, maybe I can pull back a little bit if I have good rankings. And at that point, what you should be doing, I'm not saying turn it off. Like, don't turn it off, because what's going to happen is you'll turn it off and all of a sudden you have no visibility and that can go bad. And it might take you a couple months to really feel that impact, but you will eventually feel that impact. So my advice is always dial it down to, a little bit. Get middle, if you've been sitting at the top of the page forever, maybe get the middle of the page. The other thing is that the top of the page is becoming so saturated right now that used to be, if you had rankings even 5, you were above the fold. That's not the case anymore. You might have 1 or 2 spots that are organic. Everything else is paid. So, you may see a significant decrease, but at that point, if you're dialing it down instead of completely shutting it off, and I would do this in increments, then you can track your total sales. You can look at your other ratios and be like, okay, this is sustaining. We're good. Nope. All of a sudden it dropped for a couple of weeks. Like, maybe we need to turn it back on. And then at that point, you're just playing with dials.
That's great. And when it comes to doing these testings and this optimization of the campaigns, which I think is also a question people ask a lot, is how often will you advise making these changes and optimize the campaigns? Because the thing is, some people think that by making changes on a daily, hourly basis, that's going to make the PPC better. But the reality, it reaches a point that you're guessing because you don't have enough data, right? So what is usually the window of time? I know this might change for sure depending on the budget, but usually what is the time you would advise people to wait before changing completely everything without really any data to back that up?
So if it's for new stuff, ideally, you might get 7 days data because you have the 7-day attribution window for sponsored products. However, if by day 3 you have 100 clicks and no sales, you probably have enough. I wouldn't say shut it off at that point. Possibly 100 clicks is quite a bit. You might have a lagging sale, but at that point, your lagging sale numbers, so what happens is someone clicks on your ad, right? Amazon records that click 7 days out. If within that 7-day window, they go and they add it back to their cart, or maybe it's sitting in their cart and then they finally make their purchase, that will be attributed towards that click. I would say most Amazon shoppers, unless it's a high ticket item, and then you get longer, lower conversion rates, longer windows. But typically speaking, most people are going to purchase same day. So what you're waiting is for that update on that lag. But like I said, if you got 100 clicks and no sales, you're saying no one bought just then, and you waited at least a couple of days, so probably about 3 days, because they say it's a 24-hour. Well, they say it's a 12-hour update. It used to be 24. Officially, they used to say 48. So for me, I'd rather wait the 48 days if I can, at least to see what those numbers shake out to, because you'll see wild swings. To be perfectly frank, you will see data updates on same day up to like 30 days out. That's a thing. However, I don't think it's prudent to wait 30 days to make any changes whatsoever. So our cadence is a couple times a week, and we actually look at various date ranges. I'm a big fan of weighing pros and cons and determining which of each of them you think has the least amount of cons, and then trying to make adjustments for the possible cons that come with it. So what we've done is, if you look at shorter date ranges, you're viewing what's happening in the most recent time frame. You can catch, quick performance swings. There are times where certain, you get a poor review and all of a sudden the conversion rate goes down and you see a spike. Like, those things happen and they're happening in real time. So we do want to account for that. That being said, data delay. If you're always looking at shorter date ranges, first off, you'll have like those keywords that get little to no interactions just due to low search volumes. And if you're
Yes, for
only ever
sure.
looking at short ranges, you're never going to catch that in the long run.
That's correct.
And then the other thing is you might have keywords that are really good, but if you're looking at short ranges, you're kind of over optimizing things. So we kind of look at two and just kind of weigh, again, pros and cons of doing each and go
That's
about it
great.
that
I
way.
mean, yeah, I mean, I think that perfectly matches what we do as well. I think if you don't give enough time, we end up, I mean, we have seen people ending in guessing. You just keep doing changes because you think based on your knowledge that's the best keyword, but then after 30 days when you get all the data, it's not the reality for sure.
Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, when you do optimization, of course, it has to do with adjusting the budget, the bids, and I think now I want to touch on the bids themselves. I
Mm-hmm.
know some people like to create the bids around their keywords based on the profit margins. So they take in consideration the profit margin, what is the budget, and based on that they calculate their bids to keep a specific ACOS. But the reality is that in some categories and some niches, if you bid on that bid that makes sense for you, you might end up never getting any clicks or any impressions, right? So
Yes.
whenever you come to create the bids for optimization on specific keywords, do you focus a lot on what is the recommended bid by Amazon, or you usually like to start with a bid that makes sense for the client and then slowly increase it if it's required to increase
Are
it?
you talking about for starting bids?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So three things we take into account. One, how important the keyword is. If this is a keyword that we need to rank on and we're in a honeymoon period, we probably need to be more aggressive on it.
Yes.
Two is going to be client budgets. So, and then
Always.
the client risk tolerance. So certain, and there'll be certain products where the client's like, hey, I'm testing this. This is not really a product that like I absolutely think is a winner. Let's, we have limited budgets for it. Let's ease into it. So we typically present it like, hey, are you fine with easing into it? This could take more time to gather data. You don't lose as much, but the time frame to really figure out things is more long.
Yeah.
Or we'll say, hey, we'll go out of the gate. Based on what the recommended bids are, we're expecting to spend this much. We'll probably pick a narrow set of keywords to go super aggressive on. If you are starting like higher than the recommended bids in
Yeah.
Amazon, which at this point, a lot of times you're talking a couple dollars, sometimes
Yeah.
three or
For
four,
sure.
depending
It's not just
on the
10%.
keyword. Right. So at that point, if those are what your recommended bids look like, I wouldn't launch with 100 or 50 keywords. Like maybe just pick 5
Mm,
and go
yes.
there and get the data back and then make adjustments from there. So again, how important is it? What's kind of our risk tolerance and what our budget is will determine where we fall on that.
That's correct. And when it comes to then, once you start getting the data, you jump into optimizing these initial bids, and the campaigns overall. I know there is also this argument online that some people like to use just bid adjustment, and some people like to use negative keywords. So I wanted to get your touch on that. Is like you like to use negative keywords, and if not, why? And what is your view on this topic about around optimizing with negative keywords or optimizing just with bids when it comes to campaign?
Like
I know it's
most
a
of my
trick.
on
I know it's a
things, it's
tricky
gonna
one.
be,
Yeah,
it depends.
yeah,
So I will say my default is to err on the side of less negative keywords. I
yes,
don't use search on isolation, and if something is working in a campaign, even if we do convert that search to an additional keyword, I'm not a huge fan of cutting it off at the initial source, just
the
due to the
same.
fact
Yeah.
there is no guarantees that you're going to replicate
Mm,
performance when retargeting. So
for
I
sure.
like to hedge my bets and just say, hey, if it's working, it's working. That's my
Yeah.
philosophy on everything. If it works, it's not stupid. So let it work.
Yeah, for sure.
And so, however, I do recognize that there's always going to be the outlying use case. For instance, there are certain clients or certain brands where the budgets are very low and we're very, very tight on our profit margins. There are certain times where, like, say, an auto or a broad or something will pick up on what is technically your main keyword, but the expense on that is just too much for you to sustain currently. And although it's
Mm,
a good keyword for you, although it's one that we would want to target eventually, sometimes,
yeah.
especially in the autos, those will just end up spending so much on those top keywords that you really don't have the ability to
Mm,
really test everything else. So in those specific use cases, even though that's not something I do because I don't typically negate keywords that are relevant or search
Yes.
terms that are relevant to products, I believe there are certain use cases where it makes logical sense to do so.
Yes,
So
for
again,
sure. Like when, for example, a quick example just on that, it might be if your campaign starts showing you for very generic, broad
mhm.
keywords that don't make sense to your product, or brands that don't make sense to your product, or features, colors. So I think for sure that's when negative keywords play a big role. Yeah,
Yeah.
great. So now, when it comes to optimization, I know this might slightly change depending on the type of campaigns. Because, for example, with sponsored product campaigns, we are always more focused toward getting the sales directly on the product. But when we start using sponsored brands and sponsored display, most of the time the objective is more around brand awareness, right? Getting those expressions, creating that halo effect around your brand. So what do you usually see as a main difference when it comes to optimizing these two type of campaigns, if there is any? If you can briefly touch on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes back to goals. I think you definitely can utilize like sponsor display product targeting ads, or if you're being very specific on what keywords you're using for sponsor brand ads, there's definitely ways to use those ad types more bottom of the funnel as well.
Yes.
So I think it
Mm-hmm.
just goes back to objectives. Certain brands are like not cool with saying like, hey, we got all these impressions and our
Yeah,
click-through
they
rate
don't
looks
like
good.
that.
We're getting
Yeah.
brand recognition. Um,
Yeah.
there are certain products where it does make sense, especially if you're looking at products with like subscribe and saves or repeat
Yes.
purchases. And that's definitely something you can track. Like Amazon will give you new to brand metrics. And you also can look at kind of like your ratios of subscribe and saves. Is that going up? Especially products where the cost per clicks are very high, like supplements and things like that. Like it's
Yeah.
astronomical and it's crazy.
Crazy.
But
Yeah.
there, it definitely makes sense to track those numbers because at the end of the day, whatever is the true representation of what you're actually getting in your sales and your profits,
Yeah.
that's how it should be calculated.
Great. Okay, that's very nice. Now, let's say you are managing a campaign, or an account that has more than 10 products, 15, 20 products. I think at that stage some people might start thinking, okay, maybe I need to introduce some software here to help me with the optimization of my campaigns. So this is basically where I want to bring my next questions, which is, do you advise people start implementing software when it comes to optimization, or what is usually your thought about implementing these kind of tools we see out there when it comes to PPC optimization?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what you're able to manage. Um, Yeah, so we still manage mostly through bulk files. I do recognize that there are benefits to software. It's
Yeah.
definitely scalable. So if you're having issues with just not being able to deal with like the sheer amount of campaigns or the sheer amount of products in your ad account, at that point, software would probably be a good idea for you. So we still
Okay.
manage like clothing accounts that we're talking thousands of SKUs and
Yeah,
multi-layer listings through bulk files. So it's
that's great.
entirely possible to do things in a way that still has some automations in place because we have our own systems for dealing with
Yeah.
that. It's possible. It does get a little bit more technical. I
Yeah.
like the technical aspect. I
That's
like to
great.
say
Yeah.
like, this is
Yeah.
what I want. I'm going to build it. That's me. You might
Yeah.
not think that's fun, and that's
Yeah.
perfectly
For
fine.
sure.
So I think the most important thing is one, do what it is that you can realistically manage. I definitely think there's like a best way of doing things and then a way that's sustainable. So the best thing to do is kind of like find the good balance for you in between those two. Um, and then, yeah, so there's good software out there. I think it's also important to find a software that's going to mesh with your natural ad philosophy. So there's
Yes.
certain things out there that definitely focus more on like search term isolation tactics. And then there's other ones that aren't really geared to that so much. If you're coming from an account that doesn't want to use search term isolation, and then you're mainly focusing on a product that offers that, is probably not a good fit. So you
Yes.
just, you need to figure out which software is going to be able to give you what it is that you need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people also fall in the trap that they think having a software, that means you don't need any more somebody managing your campaigns and they put 24/7 automatic bids, automatic recommendations. They don't even look at the campaigns anymore, and we have seen those accounts is definitely a nightmare. So I think for sure the best approach, at least based on experience, and hybrid. I mean, if you don't like too much of the complication, like you have
Hmm.
50% 24/7 software, and you can have the other 50% where a human team goes in and do the
Hmm.
more high level strategy of those
Yeah.
campaigns for sure.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
So I think now to start wrapping up today's episode, my last question would be, what is usually the main mistakes you see people do when optimizing their campaigns, and what is usually a tip you would advise on top of that to help them be as efficient as
Hmm.
possible when it comes to optimization? If you can think of any, if not, that's totally fine. Yeah.
Main mistakes, probably two-part. One would be picking the wrong keywords,
Mm,
going after the wrong targets, getting emotionally
yeah,
tied to keywords.
for sure.
Me as sort of a third, second party manager, I still have these keywords. I'm like, why is this not working for the product? This is exactly the product. It makes no sense. It's not converting. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, God is telling me it's not converting. I need to go with what the market's actually telling me, not what I want to happen. And then the same thing goes, especially for brand owners. Like, this is my top keyword. I need to rank on this one. It's got 100,000 search volume. Look at all my possible sales.
Yeah.
And then more experienced marketers would say, yes, but the reviews needed to get there, the sales velocity needed to get there, not to mention the ad spend needed to get there is more than you can sustain right now. So you need to start where it is that you can start. And if that's on lower volume and less volume in the space, but you can do that in a more sustainable way, that's actually where you're going to want to start. So keyword selection is huge. And
Yeah.
then in addition to keyword selection, also um, not recognizing that all keywords are not created equal for our product. So if you have a keyword that is working very well for your product, but like say you're like, I need 25% ACOS across the board and everything needs to be optimized for that. If you have a
Yeah.
keyword that's getting a lot of sales velocity for your product, you're getting a lot of orders for it, and you can see those rankings start to climb. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, nope, it's at 35%. I need 25,
Yeah.
and you just cut it off. You'll most likely see a decrease in performance, and which can hurt your total sales and then ultimately your brand overall. So being able to just kind of, I don't know, put like hedges or gates around what you're doing
Yes,
with certain
for
keywords
sure.
definitely is going to help you in the long run.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, that's an amazing tip. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. So
Yeah.
great. I think let's conclude today's episode. First, I want to thank you once again for coming. I mean, all the knowledge you dropped today is very valuable. I appreciate that. I appreciate your time. Thank you. And before I finish, I want to give you the opportunity to, of course, share all your social media channels, your website, your agency, where people can find you. And for sure, we're gonna put all that on the description as well. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That sounds good. So if you just want to snoop on what I'm talking about on PPC, the best place to do that would be to follow me on LinkedIn.
Yes.
If you're interested in working with us, you definitely can hit up our website, which is jungler.com, JUNGLR.com. Form at the bottom, and you can hit us up there.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, definitely see you on the next one, and take care. Okay. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks so
Bye
much.
bye.